This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is brought to you by The Unkillables by Jay Boyette, which is destined to become a classic of zombie vs. caveman literature. Learn more over at jboyett.net. So that's jboyett.net.
Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 240 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Our guest today is Naren Shankar. He's a showrunner on the Syfy channel show The Expanse, and he's also been a writer or producer for many other shows, including CSI, Farscape, and The Outer Limits, as well as Star Trek The Next Generation, Star Trek Voyager, and Star Trek Deep Space Nine. The Expanse is based on a series of novels by James S. A. Corey, which is the pen name of authors Daniel Abraham and Ty Frank. We previously interviewed Daniel back in episode 35, and Ty back in episode 113, and we also reviewed the first 4 episodes of The Expanse back in episode 180, so definitely check those out if you missed them. I also just want to add a special plea here for people to check out The Expanse, which, as you'll hear in this interview, is currently my favorite show on TV. Episode 4, which is called CQB, is one of my favorite TV episodes of all time, and I would strongly encourage everyone to watch at least the first 4 episodes of the show before making up your mind about it. And if you like what you see, then definitely watch and spread the word about Season 2, which will premiere on the Syfy channel on February 1st. I also just saw that Syfy is planning to launch a new weekly podcast called The Churn, which will feature Daniel Abraham and Ty Frank discussing every episode of the show, so definitely keep an eye out for that as well. And today's show is brought to you by The Unkillables, a new novel by Jay Boyette. And here's a description. It says, when time travelers escaping a future apocalypse accidentally bring the zombie plague back with them 30,000 years into the past, a Neanderthal must find a way to save his mother from the undead. To do that, he teams up with a woman from the future, who along the way blows his mind by teaching him about love and arithmetic. If you read only one Zombies vs. Cavemen novel this year, make it The Unkillables. So if Zombies vs. Cavemen sounds like your kind of thing, you can get the Kindle version of The Unkillables for just $3.99 over at Amazon.com, and you should also go check out the author's website over at jboyett.net, where you can learn more about his various books and plays, including Ironheart, Rogue Galaxy, and The Little Mermaid: A Horror Story, and also watch some of his short films, including The Closet, The Confession, and The Breakup. And so again, this new book of cavemen vs. zombie mayhem is called The Unkillables, and you can learn more over at jboyett.net, so that's jboyett.net. Alright, so now let's get to our interview. Alright, so we're here with Naren Shankar. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Okay, so first of all, just give us a bit of your background as a science fiction fan. Were you really into science fiction growing up?
I was massively into science fiction growing up. I'm old enough to remember the old science fiction book club. I got that thing in the mail, which is like, 5 hardcover books for 10 cents. That's how they kind of swung you in. And that's how I got, my dose of golden age science fiction, like the Foundation trilogy, Dune, everything from, and everything in between. And I was a huge Star Trek fan when I was a kid, the original series. And, it's as long as I can remember, it's been something I've been into.
And so were you always writing science fiction, or did that start at a certain point?
Boy, I can always remember like writing stories, and writing just for fun and creative writing, but, specifically science fiction, probably when I got into the entertainment industry.
Well, so tell us about, it's an interesting story because you went off to Cornell, right? And you met Ron Moore. Tell us about that.
Yeah. I started at Cornell as a liberal arts student. I was going to be, either a medieval studies major or a French literature major, but, as I got into it, it was, the employment prospects in those fields are somewhat limited. And I'd always loved science and math and always been, quite good at it. And so I transferred into the engineering school. And, I also happened to join a literary society at Cornell, the Kappa Alpha Society. And it was like a literary society and a social fraternity. We did a lot of creative writing on a regular basis. So I was writing, I was at being an engineer. Ron was 2 years behind me at Cornell, and we became really good friends. Another friend of ours, after graduation, decided he wanted to get into the entertainment industry, and that guy dragged Ron out. And then several years later, as I was an engineer, as I was finishing up my thesis, Ron said, "Why don't you come on out and come out to Los Angeles and become a writer?" And I was like, "Sounds great." And I kind of threw a couple of suitcases in my car and I drove out to LA.
And I've heard you say that you had gotten this PhD in physics and engineering or something, and your family was hoping you would become an engineer or something like that. And your mom, when you drove out to Hollywood, your mom, you say she didn't tell you this for years, but that she burst into tears after you were out the door.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. It was very, my parents were extremely supportive of it because they felt it was, I was indulging a whim, and I had started college when I was really young. I just turned 16, and they figured, I'd get this out of my system, and then I'd go back to a sensible career like a good Indian son would do. Indians are typically doctor, lawyer, engineer, business. It's like, and careers outside of that were frowned upon, I guess, kind of.
Well, right. And so you didn't have a job lined up, right? You were just kind of living on Ron Moore's couch for a while?
That's correct. Ron Moore gave me his couch. And this was kind of in that pay it forward mode because our third friend, he told Ron to come out to join him out there. And Ron slept on his floor, for the first while he was out there. And then I came out, and I think I was on Ron's couch for a couple of months. His girlfriend at the time was not that thrilled with the arrangement, as I recall.
And he was working on Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Yeah, he had just gotten onto the show. I think just after that was season 3, I guess. There was Star Trek was unique in the industry at that time, and probably still to this day. It had what was called an open submission policy, which was the show would accept fan scripts. If you signed a release and that Paramount put together, you could send them in, and so what that created was like this tons of material that would come in across the transit, and every year, people would go through it, and every season, 1 or 2 scripts would get bought, or a writer would get found. That's how Ron got his break to get on staff. Renee Echevarria, who was on the Next Generation staff, he also did the same thing. And the other way in was through the internship programs that were in town. And I wrote a spec for Star Trek, sent it in under the open submission policy. Ron got it to the people who were there. They liked it, thought it had potential, and I got an internship through the Writers Guild that got me, to be the WGA intern for like a 6-week internship. Brandon Braga had come in on a Television Academy, ATAS internship. And and ultimately this all led to staff jobs for me. Brandon was on, Renee came in later. I was the last one to join on Next Generation.
Right. So you're a relatively recent college grad, and suddenly you're writing for Star Trek. Was that just a dream come true, or was it totally amazing?
The joke used to be like, if only they knew how much we would pay to be on this show. I mean, you're working on a show that you loved as a kid. You're at a television studio, this great, storied historical movie studio in Hollywood. It was absolutely a dream come true. And, you're making this amazing show and, get to reinvent the thing that you saw and loved as a kid. I mean, it doesn't really get much better than that. And it was awesome. It really was. It was a great learning experience. We had really good bosses who gave basically, 4 first timers. I mean, the core staff of Next Generation was Ron, Brandon, Renee, and myself at the end. Joe Minosky was there as well. He was the more experienced hand, but he was became more of a consultant towards the end. For the four of us, it was all of our first job in the business. And we had bosses that let us, argue and have spirited debates and try new things and were very nurturing and created actually a really, really good environment in which to learn and kind of get your footing in the business. And I think that all of us, carried that forward into other shows over the years, because those first experiences can be incredibly formative. It's like if you're with bad people and you learn bad habits, you tend to do that as you go ahead. And our staff was, there was a lot of spirited debate, but our direct boss, Jerry Taylor, who was our supervising producer, and then Kelly Peen, executive producer on the various Star Treks after Next Gen, she liked to quote Mike Nichols, which was "best idea wins," and that was really, the touchstone for everything that we did. Is that you could argue, you could yell at each other. We got, had a lot of bright people with a lot of strong ideas, but at the end of the day, we were all trying to make the show better, and so it was a great environment, really, really great environment to learn.
I mean, I have heard Ron Moore say, though, that he got sort of frustrated with all the rules. There were all these rules for the Star Trek universe that you had to follow.
Oh, that's a totally separate thing. Well, I was talking more about process. In terms of the creative strictures of the Star Trek: The Next Generation universe, that was tough because there was a lot of things you could do and couldn't do. And, it was something that we fought against quite often. And, in the latter seasons of the show, you see it kind of changing a little bit, but still it wasn't a massive dramatic shift. I mean, you had people who couldn't lie because lying is bad. They wouldn't get drunk because, that's not good. And it's like everybody was too good. Everybody was too noble. Everybody was a little too pure. And I think that's, ultimately why the show can feel at times, where you're watching just a bunch of very perfect people, help other people solve their problems. And so that's what Star Trek was at that time. It was a reaction to the original series, and Gene Roddenberry had wanted, the baser instincts of humanity kind of worked out, and gotten out of our systems by the time we got to the world of Next Generation. Dramatically, it's a less interesting place to be.
Right. I gather that Ron wrote a whole manifesto about what he would do differently, which is going to come back
for Galactica.
Well, that this experience on Star Trek inspired him to write this manifesto of how Star Trek could be, how he would do it differently if he were in charge.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure that's very much was a part of. I'm sure that was a huge part of what prompted him to do that. As I recall, though, I think that he wrote that manifesto after the Galactica miniseries had been shot, as they were contemplating going to series with it.
Interesting. So did you? What was going on with you when Ron was getting the Battlestar Galactica reboot going?
I was on CSI. I mean, I was. I think that's right. That would have been about what year? About 2002, 2003.
2003, like it aired. Yeah.
Yeah. I was on CSI. I'd been brought on there as the first, right at the end of season 2, and I was there running the show with Carol Mendelsohn for 8 years.
I thought it was interesting because I just watched your episode of Space Oddity this morning.
That's one of my favorites.
It was really fun. Could you talk about how that came about?
Yeah, we had always wanted to do a show set at like a a Star Trek convention or like a sci-fi convention. And actually, after Battlestar Galactica had ended, I hired David Weddle and Bradley Thompson, who had written on Galactica and who had actually come out of the Deep Space Nine Star Trek. I'd known them in various capacities for many, many years, and I liked them very much. And so I brought them onto CSI, and that was an episode that we started talking about doing, and we ended up writing it together, and it was really one of my favorites. There's an interesting story about it, actually. Is because initially when we conceived it, what I wanted to do was use clips from old Star Trek episodes. And at the time J.J. Abrams was doing the first of the new Star Trek movies. And so there was this whole weird embargo that was going on with like doing anything about Star Trek. And Paramount Television and Paramount Film Studios have this very odd kind of split between them, and it's all very complicated. But I kept asking permission to get the original series clips to be used in the show, and I kept getting shut down. And finally, it went up all the way to the chief counsel at Viacom, and we were on a phone call with like everyone. I was like, "What is going on here?" And there was apparently some agreement that they had made with J.J. Abrams' company to not use anything until the new movie was released. And so at the end of the day, they told us we couldn't use any clips from the original series. And so we ended up creating a show in the show and sort of, riffing on episodes of Star Trek, and each one of those had to like pass like legal muster to like not be too close. But anybody who loves the original series knows which episodes we're talking about. So it's like anyway. So it's really one of my favorites of my run at CSI. And even better was I went to this thing at the Writers Guild one night, and Dorothy Fontana was there. And she said, and we met, and she was like, I saw that episode of CSI. I loved it. And we had this whole long conversation, and I was like, oh my God, you wrote Journey to Babel. And it was like, it was a nice fan moment for me. So yeah, that was a fun episode.
Well, and it's such a funny premise, because the premise basically is that there's a Ron Moore type showrunner who's going to reboot this Star Trek type show, but make it all dark and edgy.
Yep.
And the fans, and he gets murdered, and it could be any of the fans who did it, right?
Did you? Yeah, but did you see Ron's cameo?
Yeah, no, I saw that.
I got Ron his SAG card, man. I asked him to do it, and Grace Park has a cameo in there.
I saw her, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, it was really, really fun. And Ron was actually good. He nailed the line. You suck.
Yeah, so for listeners, Ron Moore plays the random fan in the audience, screaming angrily at this director.
It's great. It's like the guy unveils his new dark, edgy vision of the show, and the crowd is simply aghast. And Ron's the one who speaks up first and says, "You suck," and then the crowd goes crazy.
Well, because I heard it was inspired by an actual thing. When Ron rebooted Battlestar Galactica, he went to Galacticon or something and showed them footage from his new show, and they all hated it. They thought Starbuck should be a man, and they're like, "Where's Daggett?" and all this stuff. And he's like, "Well, that is
100% correct. That is exactly what it was based on."
Yeah. It's just really funny. Okay, and I mean, you mentioned you worked on Star Trek Deep Space Nine and Voyager. You worked on a whole bunch of shows that unfortunately we don't have time to go into all of them. But I did want to really ask you, you worked on The Outer Limits, which is the show I was really, really into in college. And I saw that you worked on an episode with Harlan Ellison and A.E. Van Vogt. I was just curious what that was like.
That was one of my favorites, actually. The Outer Limits had, it was an anthology series. It was a remake of the classic 60s series. And what we wanted to do was every year we were trying to do like a classic sci-fi story, doing an adaptation of it. And, one of the ones we had talked about was a very famous story called The Human Operators by Harlan Ellison and A. Van Vogt. And, for a number of reasons, one of which, was that Van Vogt was very ill, and Harlan wanted to get, to get health coverage under the guild, rules by getting an option. And so he did a very kind thing. And so he allowed the story to be optioned. And I had read as a kid, like the famous, hellacious relationships Harlan had with, various adaptations of his work, from City on the Edge of Forever to Star Lost to all of the things that he had done. And so I had loved his stuff forever, of course. So, and I wanted to write the story. And so I get on the phone with him for the first time after we're going to do this. And literally the first thing I said to him was, I said, Mr. Ellison, I just want you to know I'm far more interested at the end of the day with this script having more of your words on paper than mine. And there's like a silence at the other end, and then he goes, kid, we're going to get along great. And it was actually a tremendous collaboration. And I think that once I had expressed to him that I really was interested in honoring the work, it actually turned out that he was much more flexible than I had expected him to be or imagined, because like I wrote a script and he goes, kid, you were too faithful to the material, and here's what I think you should change. And so it ended up being just a really, really fun collaboration. It won a WGC award, I believe, that year. And, it was one of my absolute all-time favorites.
So were you just talking to him over the phone, or did you ever meet him face to face?
Oh, I met him many times. We were up in Vancouver, so that particular part of the process was done over the phone, but I met him subsequently, and, we've had lunches together and all of that stuff. So he's still Harlan.
I mean, do you have any crazy Harlan Ellison stories, or has it always been?
I don't. He has more than enough of his own to beat the band. He doesn't need any of mine. He's just, he's incredibly, he's a real giant in the business. I was actually probably even more fond of his nonfiction than I was of his fiction. I just thought he's a brilliant essayist, and anyways, it was a real honor and a pleasure to work with him in that capacity.
And then I also really wanted to ask you worked on Farscape. Well, could you talk about what your involvement with that was like?
I was on Farscape in season 2. That was a really, really fun show. I think it was a little ahead of its time, in terms of, how the stories were told. David Kemper, was the showrunner. We shot everything down in Sydney, and he brought me on, and, that show really, and Rock Me Band created it, but David was really, I think, the heart and soul of it in so many ways. He just had a magnificently crazy and operatic sensibility, and just an awesome imagination. And it was unusual and beautiful and strange. It didn't always work, but it was certainly, just a fascinating, interesting group of people. And just stylistically, it was quite beautiful as well.
Yeah, I was a big fan of that show, and it got canceled very suddenly. I guess you were gone by that point.
Yeah, I mean, I was there for one season. It was, at that point I had lived up in Vancouver for 3 years doing The Outer Limits, and then I moved to Sydney for a year doing Farscape. And, at that time, science fiction was much more of a ghetto than it is today. And having been out of Los Angeles for such a long time, I kind of felt like I was dropping off the map a little bit in the entertainment business. So I wanted to come back. I think Farscape did it go 4 seasons? I think it did.
Yeah.
And then there was like a movie. Yeah. Again, I think it was just a little bit ahead of the curve and ahead of its time. That's the kind of show that today I think would have a tremendously strong cult following. And at that time, it was the most expensive show that the Syfy channel had ever done. They were sort of all over the place and trying to find an identity, not sure they were making some transition between being the place where you could watch reruns of the X-Files and then, and trying to do original programming, but also wanting to do Ghost Hunters. And there's a huge, just sort of like it was just, they couldn't quite find their identity. And then they found Battlestar Galactica, but then they sort of programmed against it for a long time. So they were in that weird transitional phase. And, I think had it been under a different regime and a different time, it might have lasted quite a bit longer.
Yeah, I mean, Farscape and Firefly are the two shows that just among my friends, everyone's like, oh, how could they cancel that?
Yeah, I mean, and it's just economics, I think. And these places just didn't quite know what they wanted to be in terms of programming entities. And it's just, so many things have to go right to get a hit. You just, and so many of them are totally beyond your control, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay, well, so speaking of the Syfy channel, you're doing the Expanse now on Syfy. And so just tell us about kind of what was your first inkling that this Expanse thing was going to be a show?
Well, I was brought into it, was sort of like the last element brought into it, because they had developed a pilot script with Alcon Television. They'd actually written it in-house, and they took it out to the marketplace. Mark Fergus and Hawk Ostby, who had written Children of Men and Iron Man, feature guys, they had, they really liked the books. And so they wrote this pilot, and then they needed somebody to run it. And I had actually worked with Sharon Hall, who was the president of Alcon Television when she was at Sony. And she thought I would be a good fit for the material. And so I came in and met with everybody and really hit it off with Mark and Hawk. And the funny thing was, after they hired me, actually, I'm going to back that up. There are two things that were funny. One was when I originally got the material, my agent said, "Hey, I would like you to look at this script," and they said, "It's from the Syfy channel," and I literally just hit trash in my email. It's like I was like, because I hadn't worked at Syfy channel since Farscape, and I had watched the network. They made Battlestar Galactica, a show that I thought was a masterpiece. And for like the next, whatever years, they just disavowed it. They wanted to pretend it didn't exist. They wanted to program against it. It just seemed like they just were not interested in doing anything. And every year I would get material from them. And every year I would tell my agents, I hate this. I'm not doing this. And so when the email comes in with the script, I go, this is just terrible. And like 3 weeks later, my agent said, please read this script. I really think you should. And I scrolled to the bottom, and that's when I saw that, it was written by the guys who wrote Children of Men, a movie that I think is terrific. And I said, okay, I'll give this a shot. And I read it, and I go, they're making this show? Because it was like, it was grown up, it was smart, it was interesting. And that's actually what got the ball rolling. But the second funny thing was, after they hired me to run it, Sharon Hall tells me, she goes, and by the way, the book authors are going to be in your writing staff with you. And I was like, wow, you really think that's a good idea? And it turned out it was a really good idea. And they were very open to truly adapting the material. And it's been a terrific experience, ever since.
So I know you mentioned you have the scientific background and you were a science consultant for Next Generation. Was that how much of a factor was that in them wanting you on this show?
It was such a long time ago. I don't even think that they probably wouldn't even have known it. I mean, that was, my goodness, that's probably 25 years ago. Sharon knew me as the showrunner of CSI. She didn't know me as the Star Trek guy. But I think, they met plenty of people, I think, for the job. The place where the science background came in, I think, in our favor was, I think a lot of people might have adapted the material differently. Because one of the things that the Expanse does is it tries to show, at least a semi-realistic portrayal of what it might be like to live in space and be in ships that are under thrust and all of the gravity effects, etc. I think a lot of people might have just tried to ignore them and thought those weren't important. My immediate instinct was to embrace them, because what I felt was interesting was I had never seen a show try to do this, where it was the opportunity to make space a character. And it's something that's constantly glossed over or just kind of tossed out in the trash, because people don't want to deal with wire work and weightlessness and worrying about thrust and gravity and all of these things, because they don't feel like science fiction is about that. They feel it's about metaphors. They feel like it's about great allegories of stories. It's like, it can be about all of those things. But if you're trying to do a show of this nature, I think it would have been running away from what makes The Expanse actually unique and special. And so I think that my science background may have given me an ability to appreciate it in a little different way than many other people might have, because it's something that I think is a real interesting signature element of the show that really distinguishes it from other science fiction that's been done.
Yeah, I just think it's so cool. I mean, in the show, the spaceships fire their thrusters to get going, and then when it's time to slow down, they swing the whole ship around and fire the thrusters in the opposite direction to slow down, and which is how it would really work. And it's just so striking that it's never or rarely been done before in movies and TV, and it's just so cool to see that you're doing that like that.
Well, one of the only people who got it right was Stanley Kubrick. I mean, if you watch 2001, he kind of got it right. And boy, does that movie hold up. It was made in 1968, I think. But for most people, the space battles they're just rehashes of, World War II fighter engagements in the Pacific. That's all they are. And that's fine if they want to be that kind of a fantasy. But I find great beauty in the way the ships move, and in our show, they're, flipping a ship around, turning off the thrusters, flipping it around, turning it on to brake, and that being difficult and scary and tough. It's majestic watching these things move. It's kind of beautiful watching them twist around and continue their momentum around the center of mass while the maneuvering thrusters roll. It's just, you just don't see it. And we're lucky to be at a time when the visual effects side of things, and that's Bob Monroe's our visual effects supervisor and his team. They do such a beautiful job of it. And it really does give the show a completely different, visual aesthetic, in the science fiction genre that I love watching it. It's just something you kind of go, wow, that just looks amazing. And we push the situations where we can really highlight that as much as we possibly can.
So when in the scene where Miller is kind of spinning the map around, is that just something an artist came up with, or did someone actually sit down and calculate all those trajectories and do the math and all that kind of stuff?
There's a lot of realism in it. You're talking about when he's in his apartment and he's spinning the Star Trek around. Yeah, there's a lot of real stuff in it, but that was partially just an amazing actor, Thomas Jane, who really was doing certain things, and then the artists being able to match their animations to his movements. I can't say with 100% certainty that all of the orbits and trajectories and distances are all correct, but they're certainly believable. And we strive for accuracy as much as possible in situations like that.
Right. And so one of the episodes where all the gravity stuff comes to the fore the most is episode 4. It's called CQB. And you're actually credited as the writer on that episode. I just have to say, I think it's one of my favorite TV episodes I've ever seen in my life. I love it so much.
Thank you. It was really fun. It's one of probably the most fun scripts I've ever written. And it was actually, I had read that scene in the first book of The Expanse, Leviathan Wakes. And that's actually what I did. Was like, I really want to do this show because I wanted to put that scene on film, and I knew we could do it. Where Shed's head gets blown off. Because I'd never seen anything like that, or read anything like that, or seen anything close to it in a science fiction show. And I was really pleased with the way that turned out.
So you kind of called dibs on that scene. You're like, I got this one.
I did. I totally did. It's sort of like the boss's prerogative. I go, I'm writing this episode. And also it was, I wanted to do a big battle episode. We had the first 4 episodes of the show. It's a bit of a slow burn in terms of storytelling. The beginning of season 1, we don't even get, to a classic standing set, which is the Rossi, until the end of episode 4. And so, what we wanted to do was build up to a big moment in episode 4 and have a gigantic battle. And so what's fun about that episode for me is it just doesn't stop. Each phase of it, just like you go, wait, what? There's more, and there's more, and there's more, and there's more. And it has, I was real pleased with the way that whole thing kind of came out. But, that was one of the highlights of season 1.
Yeah. And I don't want to spoil it too much for people who haven't seen it yet, but just some of the ways that the action and the violence intersects with the zero gravity is just really like striking and stuff you just don't see in TV science fiction.
Yeah. I mean, the whole last sequence when they're trying to get to the Tachi, with Holden and Naomi on that causeway, that was, again, it's like how he gets out of the problem is just understanding how things in space work. And when you really kind of like dissect the scene, it's like they're running, the gravity goes out, they go off into space, they're screwed. And it's just like he uses conservation of momentum to get himself back down to the deck. And it's just kind of again, you don't really see that often.
I mean, do you think part of the reason you don't see it is because it's just hard to execute? I mean, how hard is it to execute that kind of zero gravity stuff?
It's hard to execute because it's wire work and choreography and virtual sets and a lot of green screen and, from a physical production standpoint, it's demanding, but it's hard to understand. And, you don't have to have a PhD in physics to understand it, but you do have to understand how science works. And we have these conversations in our room a lot because, Ty Frank, Daniel Abraham, they know a lot about science. And, Ty in particular is really, he really understands and he's thought very deeply about the real physics of how stations and ships and, everything works. That's my own, natural background, but it's not the background of anybody else in that room. And what's nice about the show is, we have writers. Robin Veith is from Mad Men. Dan Nowak is from The Killing. Mark and Hawk are, Children of Men. They're not science fiction guys necessarily, even though they wrote Iron Man. But, it's that combination of all of these human elements, all of these science elements, and everybody, there's pieces of everybody in every single script. And so it's a nice balance and a nice combination of people. Because The Expanse is all of those things. It's like the science would be boring if it didn't have human beings, at the center of it. And, those human beings would be perhaps, less interesting situations if we ignored some of the realities of life in space. So nicely, in the best case scenario, all of those things work together. And at the end of the day, you have a more interesting and a more unique show than you might have had otherwise.
Yeah, well, so you mentioned that you were a little bit apprehensive about having Ty and Daniel in the room, but obviously they've proven to be this tremendous resource. Can you say sort of how you think the show might have turned out differently if they hadn't been so directly involved?
Absolutely. You know what? The thing about The Expanse is it's a very, very deep universe that Ty and Daniel have created, and they've thought about it really, really extensively. It's like we were, in the process of going through season 1, and we came on this story and this character of Fred Johnson, and I go, well, I don't understand. What did he do? Why are people mad at him? And it's like, he seems to have this story. It's like, because it's hinted at in the book, it's not in Leviathan Wakes. And then Ty and Daniel go, oh, well, it's all about this stuff. And they spin out this whole story. And I'm like, what the fuck? What are you talking about? None of that's in the book. And they go, no, that's in the novella. It's called The Butcher of Anderson Station. And I go, there's novellas? And they go, yeah, we wrote a bunch of these novellas. And I read the novella. And I go, this is better than the book, guys. It's like, and what we realized, what I realized was that these guys had created these novels, at least the first couple, which were I think they're much more plot focused, and they had supported them with these highly character focused novellas. They're just kind of like, they're like one act plays, really. And so what I thought would be a really interesting way to adapt the show, the whole works of The Expanse, was to combine those things. And so in the course of our first couple seasons, we have borrowed from the novellas, we've incorporated the stories into our stories to the effect that I think we've really been able to deepen the characters in a way that's very, very true to the totality of the work. But also true to the overall plot framework of the novels. And I'm actually quite pleased with the way that has all worked together, and we're continuing to do it. This coming season 2, we pulled some material from The Vital Abyss, which is their new novella, and we did an episode that adapts the story Drive, which is about Solomon Epstein and the creator of the Epstein Drive, which enabled colonization in the world of The Expanse. So we're telling stories in some kind of unusual ways. And it's actually, none of that would have happened if Ty and Daniel hadn't been in the room. Because, and also there's things, smaller things too, like I go like, wow, it'd be really interesting to highlight some element of Belcher culture, like, but what can we do? And then Ty and Dad go, oh, we could have like a slingshot club. And I'm like, what's that? And they go, well, it's all this. And then suddenly we got a story, and that ended up in episode 4. So that's, and beyond that, and they're writing scripts, they wrote episode 7, season 1, they wrote 2 episodes in season 2. So I love the fact that we have the people who created this world who are here allowing us to change and adapt their work into a different medium. And I understand that that's a different thing. But having them there means we don't break anything. Because I don't believe in... There are many people who, like, when they get something to adapt, they go, well, we'll just throw all that shit out about the book. It's like, I'm not that guy. I like to adapt the work. There's a reason people like it. And so I think the job on my end of things is to understand, what you're actually working with and to stay true to the spirit of that material. And hopefully you get to deepen it and enrich it, and do other things with it just because it's in a different form. We have changed chronology of events. We have changed the reason why people do things very differently in the book, but we don't always go A to B to C, but we always get from A to C. It's just like, so it's, and that's kind of the way we've been moving along. It seems to be working so far.
Now, so as a showrunner, are you equally involved in every aspect of the show? Are there any areas that you focus on more than others?
No, I'm involved in every single aspect of the show. It's like there's nothing that does not cross my plate.
Are you credited as a writer for any of the season 2 episodes?
Yeah, we spread them out over the season. I wrote episode 6 and I co-wrote episode 13. But yeah, we have a staff of, it's me, Mark and Hawk, Ty and Daniel, Rob and Dan, Georgia Lee, and then a new writer this year, Howie Lambert, and yeah, that's our staff. But it's it's only season 1 was 10 episodes, season 2 is 13. They're just small cable orders, but we kind of go in rotation.
So without giving spoilers, is there anything in season 2 that you're particularly excited for people to see?
Well, let's see. Got to be really careful about spoilers. Yeah, I think that the return to Eros, that is kind of the first big movement of season 2, is pretty remarkable. I don't think people are going to see much like it. And then we've got the second half of the season's pretty amazing too. As we start getting into the events of Caliban's War, which is the second book in the series.
So do you follow online, like reviews and message boards and stuff like that? Do you follow, or do you get fan mail, things like that?
People send stuff to me. I'm not like, I don't really have a big presence online because if there's too many voices telling me what they like and don't like, it actually confuses me a little bit because at the end of the day, I kind of feel like I have to make what I think is good. And it's interesting to hear people's reactions, but it's just sort of like, you're not going to get 10 people to agree on anything, with stuff like this. And that's from, that's every science fiction show I've ever been on has been the same thing. But, I've been really pleased as people have passed along, the various reviews and fan responses. It definitely seems like we're hitting a chord. And I think that, I've read some very, very smart, thoughtful reviews of the material that really do seem to understand what we're doing. So that's been quite gratifying.
Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the things I really admire most about the show is that it always prioritizes realism over having anything artificial that would explain things to the audience. So a character never explains how the technology works or anything if they wouldn't have any logical reason to do that.
Well, Mark Fergus always said, I borrowed this story from him a couple of times. It's like, you don't sit in a car and go, my, what a terrifically impressive internal combustion engine this thing has. You just fucking drive it. It's just like, okay, so it's part of your world. It's like, you don't talk about the thing, and that's where we kind of go with, uncommented technology. It's like, Ty would tell this story about, people go, well, where's all the artificial intelligence and robots? And he goes, they're all over the place. It's like, how do you think those guns come out of the ship? How do you think it's like, it's just that we don't talk about it. And what we've done, in a visual sense is like, if you really watch carefully, like when the Rossi is like when it's escaping from the Donager, the Tachi, it's like, and it's smashing into things. If you watch, when the guns get close to something, they retract back into the ship. Like they duck. The guns are like, they have collision avoidance sort of built into their mechanism. We don't talk about it, but you see that happening. It's like, there's intelligence to things. There's all sorts of stuff around it. There's when the guns fire, they're like retro, there's a retro that fires on the other side so that the ship's momentum isn't changed. There's all sorts of little things like, that's all like artificial intelligence and robotics. We just don't talk about it.
Right. Well, I mean, there's this scene in season 1 where Naomi picks up kind of a handful of sand and lets it spill through her fingers, and she can tell from the way it falls what side of the station they're on. And I honestly didn't get that. I just heard you explain it, but I was like, oh, that's so cool. But
yeah, it's like the effect is she picks up some dust and she drops it and she sees it spiral. So it's like, if you understand how something is moving, the Coriolis deflection is going to be one way or the other. So understanding where you are in the station relative to the spin, that's a way you could tell, but we don't really explain it. We just see her. It's like, it's one of those like classic old scenes from a Western where, the Indian tracker the Native American tracker would look at the ground and go, they went that way. They never really explained how he knew. He just sees a broken twig. Okay, great. I guess that means there were 6 of them.
Well, no, and I really I would rather not understand it than have her give some ridiculous, for the audience explanation.
Yeah, I think people are very, they're very sophisticated in how they absorb this sort of thing, because it's, and as long as you give them a little hint that the character is seeing something, and if the character says what it means, then they're willing to go with it. And that's what I mean about she drops the dust and it spirals. It's like, that's something that seems unusual. it should drop straight down. We show the dust spiraling, and she says it means something. Then I go, okay, she knows what she's talking about. This must be one of those cool space things. And if you care about it, you'll understand it a little bit more deeply. But it doesn't require you to explain that to anybody. There's a show that was on, I think when our first season was on, it was like a network sci-fi show. And there's the whole scene about like a drone taking garbage out of the house and putting it by the curtain. It's like, and it's just like it goes on forever. And the whole scene seems to be like, look how cool this is. It's like, it's the least interesting thing possible. And it shouldn't even exist as part of the scene. But it's like the whole thing is done for it. And it's not, I just don't think that that's, what that does is I think that sort of approach infantilizes the genre. Because what you're telling the audience when you show people that is that it isn't really about the people. It isn't really about drama. It isn't about the things that we all think about, which are elevated, dramatic television. It's just about techno porn and, look at this cool gizmo. And that's when things get kind of silly. We try to avoid that.
Right. And I think it gives it a lot more rewatchability too. Mm-hmm. If you don't understand everything the first time around, but if you watch it a couple times, then all these things start clicking into place and you're like, oh, now I get that. There's a unique kind of pleasure to that.
Yeah, I think so too.
This show is interesting too because it's a science fiction show set in outer space, and ever since Battlestar Galactica, really, there have not been many science fiction shows set in outer space. I mean, the Syfy Channel did a couple of them recently. We talked about Killjoys and Dark Matter on this show, but it's just so encouraging to me to see science fiction set in outer space back on television. And
I agree. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I don't know. Just do you have any thoughts about? Is this going to?
I don't know. I mean, traditionally, it's been a tough genre to crack for people because it's, there's I don't know. There's something about it. It seems to, I don't know. Maybe there's an intimidation factor. I'm not quite sure. I don't know. I can't account for it because, and I'm probably the wrong person to ask because I like the genre. So, but maybe I'll say this. The shows that seem to succeed the most are shows where it's not about the spaceships. Galactica is not about the spaceships. The original Star Trek was not about the spaceships. The Expanse is not about the spaceships. And I think that when you're into sort of the gee-whizzery, kind of cheesy space opera stuff that has often been out there. I think that's like kind of, we're back to the argument about it just seems a little juvenile. And our show may be many things, but it's certainly not juvenile.
Right, but I am very committed to the idea of science fiction as something that's going to get people thinking about the future and think about how do we settle the solar system, et cetera. And I think it's good to have stories like that. You can get characters
Absolutely.
anywhere, but...
Absolutely. Well, I mean, look, one of the things that we talked about, but like if I would turn the question back on you, it's like, what do you think The Expanse is about? I mean, and there's no right answer to the question, but when you're watching it, what do you think like the big deep themes of the show are? I'm curious.
Well, I mean, I think it's about how, in a way, it's almost this sort of the reaction to Star Trek as well. The idea that futuristic technology is not going to solve human problems for us. These are problems we're going to have to work out, as humans. There's not going to be a technological quick fix for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that we sort of take our problems with us as we expand out into the universe. The technology isn't the only thing that solves them. That's absolutely part of the show. There's also things like, that it's the nature of human beings to identify people who look different or talk different or have a different culture as other than you. And when that happens, that's when wars occur. And so even though we've got this multicultural, polyglot, expansion into the human system, Earthers are different from Martians, who are different from Belters. It's like we've tribalized once again, and we're already at each other's throats again. And then that's a sad state of human nature. I think that when you're dealing with themes like that and you transpose them into space and you add all these other things, I think that you have the ability to have some very interesting storytelling that just happens to be set in space.
Well, let me say, too, though, about the tribalism, because I think it's true that tribalism persists, but the more humanity spreads out into the galaxy, the more you see how fluid those tribes are. And, now we have Earth versus Mars, but America versus Mexico has ceased to have any relevance whatsoever, right?
Right. Yes, you're right. They're fluid, but they're persistent. It's just like what you define as a tribe has changed. And so, unfortunately, the core of tribalism has remained the same. That is definitely a big theme in The Expanse, without question.
Yeah. Okay, so we're almost pretty much out of time. I just thought this was cool. I just want to mention this, that the Tycho station from The Expanse was featured on the cover of Physics Today.
I know. I sent the cover, an image of the cover to my thesis advisor at Cornell, and he was so pleased. I was like, one of his grad students made the cover of Physics Today. Sweet.
It's apparently the first time they featured an image from science fiction on the cover since 1974. So that's
really, I didn't know that. No kidding. That's awesome. Well, we're doing a Q&A panel at Caltech on Wednesday because we have so many fans there, and it's one of those hilarious moments for me, which is because like the last time I was at Caltech, no lie, was for a job interview at JPL in which I was presenting my graduate research. In addition to doing like some interviews and sit downs with people. So that's the last time I was at Caltech.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, so I just want to say in closing here that I just love this show. I mean, I was telling my girlfriend after I finished, I watched the first 4 episodes of season 2, and I was telling her after I watched them, like, I'm just so proud that something like this exists, and so happy to be involved in science fiction and be able to talk about something that takes it this seriously and is of this high quality, and obviously that the people making it care about it so much.
Well, thank you so much. That's awesome to hear.
Yeah, and so I think I'm officially declaring this my favorite show on TV. I mean, it was Black Mirror, but I think that now that we're getting to season 2 of The Expanse, I think I'm actually more interested in finding. I'm more like emotionally invested in seeing more of this than Black Mirror at the moment. And so that's
wait till you see episode 5.
Yeah.
Wait till you see episode 5. Have you read the books?
I read book 4 because I interviewed Ty about it when it came out, and I read part of book 1 when we talked about the first 4 episodes of season 1. But I have not. I don't know what's going to happen, until book 4. So
okay, cool. Well, I'm so glad, and I'm glad to hear you're into season 2. Those first 4 episodes, I think are pretty cool.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. The character of Cortazar was the one I was telling you about that we pulled from the Vital Abyss. That's the other novella. So he's not in Caliban. He's not in, and Bobby, like the whole Bobby Marine story, the Martian Marines, you actually meet them in the very beginning of the second novel in Caliban's work, but we are backing them up in time. So you're meeting them much earlier. So anyways, there's a lot of good stuff coming in season 2. I think you're going to get a real kick out of it.
Well, yeah, when we talked about season 1, 2 of the people had read all the books, and they were saying they were just looking so forward to seeing Bobby Draper. Like, she's the best character ever. And I can certainly...
Well, you're I know we're not going to be keeping anybody waiting too. I think she's in the first 1 second of the show. All right, cool. Well, this is really fun, man. Thank you for doing this. And please, please get the word out. It's like the best thing, that we can, hope for is to get a lot of people to watch the season 2 premiere on air on Syfy. It's, and they've been great partners, and they're really, pushing the marketing side of things. So get the word out. We are so proud of the show, and we do think it's something really special. So if we can get people to watch it, nothing would make us happier.
Yeah, so everyone, that'll be on February 1st on Syfy. So definitely mark your calendars, watch it. I definitely want more seasons of this show.
So do we. They've got Ty and Daniel they're contracted to write 9 books, and they have a whole story. And you know what? If we get our way, we'll tell the whole thing.
Yeah, that's just so exciting.
It's fantastic. So, well, thank you very much. This is a real pleasure. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks so much. We've been speaking with Naren Shankar, and so thank you, Naren, so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
And that was our interview. So big thanks again to Naren Shankar for joining us on the show. Big thanks as well to Shuttle Parts, Zim Zam, Amanda Iverson, Paul, Brian, and Jay Boyette, who all just signed up this week to support us on Patreon. Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time or fixed monthly contribution, you can do that via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. I'd also like to thank Jay Boyette for sponsoring today's show. Remember to check out his new book, The Unkillables, over at jboyette.net. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.